This week's Parsha continues the theme of Sefer Devarim, of Moshe's final speech to the Jewish people. And towards the end of our Parsha, we find Moshe in one of the most heartbreaking and emotional moments. You see, Moshe calls out to the entire Jewish people, and he says to them, please come forward. Atem ritem et kol asher asa Hashem le'inechem be'eretz Mitzrayim. You have all seen all that God did in Egypt. You saw everything he did to Pharaoh, to all the people. You saw the miracles, the wonders, the power of God. And yet, v'lo natan Hashem lachem leiv ladat v'nayim lerot v'oznayim lishmoa ad hayom hazeh. And despite everything that you've seen, until and including today, God still has not given you the heart to understand, the eyes to see, or the ears to hear. Somehow Moshe says to the Jewish people, you still don't get it. And the Midrash expands on these psukim and teaches us, you know what the Jewish people didn't get? Do you know what they still didn't understand? Says Rav Shmuel Bar Yitzchak, once it was known that Moshe was going to die and no one took up his case, Moshe gathered the Jewish people and gave them a piece of his mind. He says to them, one man saved 600,000 from sudden death, and yet 600,000 can't save one single man. In other words, this is the day that Moshe was going to die. He was crestfallen, and doubly so. Of course, he was devastated that he would never realize his lifelong dream of entering the Promised Land. But to add insult to injury, why had no one come forward to daven, to pray on his behalf? Why had no one stood up for him the way that he had stood up for so many people before? For 40 years, Moshe defended the Jewish people. He was their greatest champion, their greatest advocate. When God was ready to destroy the people, it was Moshe that stood up and prayed for their salvation. It was no secret that Moshe wanted nothing more than to step foot in the Promised Land, in the land of Israel. And yet, Ad Hayom Hazeh, our Parsha tells us, at no point did any member of the Jewish people ever step up and make a plea for Moshe. It's a scathing and emotional critique of the Jewish people, as well as an important lesson of what it means to stand up for our leaders when they need our support and when they need our love. And if you think about it, it's heartbreaking. But at the same time, if we take a step back for just a moment, why did Moshe really want the Jewish people to daven on his behalf? Think about it. After all, Moshe was the greatest prophet of all time. Did he actually expect that the prayers of some grumbling nation might move the divine needle more than his own personal prayers, more than his own pleas as the greatest prophet of all time? Did he even for a moment actually believe that their tefillos would be more effective than his? And I think the answer is obviously, of course not. Moshe didn't actually think that their prayers would make a difference. But that doesn't mean that the Jewish people shouldn't have davened. You see, irrespective of the outcome, the Medrash is arguing it was their responsibility to repay Moshe's kindness. They should have stood up. They should have made their voices heard. Because for sometimes the gesture in life, it matters much more than the outcome itself. Sometimes, even if we know that it won't change a single thing, just lending our voices and making the effort, it helps those closest to us know that we really care about them. And in fact, I think we see this exact idea at the beginning of our Parsha as well, where we discuss the Bikurim, the laws of giving the first fruits to the Kohen in the temple. The rabbis, Chazal, they ask, how many fruits must a farmer bring? Is it a fixed quantity, or is it a percentage of the farmer's overall production? And the answer is actually neither. Bikurim are among those mitzvos that Chazal teach us have no minimum. Elu devarim she'ein lahem shiur. It's at the discretion, you see, of the grower. It may be that some destitute vintner presents to the Kohen just a small cluster of grapes. Maybe he comes with a single raisin. And in so doing so, he fulfills his obligation. Because you see, in the end, it's not about efficacy. It's about the gesture. And that, I think, is the message that our Parsha both begins and ends with. That gestures matter sometimes even more than outcomes. You see, they matter because it sends a message to the recipient or to the onlooker that we, in no uncertain terms, that we really care. Imagine the feeling of the Kohen, who receives a grape from a farmer who spent an entire week traveling all the way down from the Golan to perform this mitzvah of Bikurim. The message isn't in the substance, it's in the form. We can't always control the levers of power or of influence. Sometimes we're just not in a position to be rainmakers. And maybe the tefillos of the Jewish people, maybe they would not have made a difference whatsoever as to whether or not Moshe would cross the Jordan. But I'll tell you what, they would have made a difference between Moshe feeling alone versus feeling the embrace of an empathetic nation. Sometimes we don't realize the impact of something small, something literally with no measure. We don't realize the difference and the impact that it can make, the difference that a gesture, that a smile could actually make. Each and every one of us has the capability. We each have the capacity to make a difference and to let people know that we really care about them. And as 5780 comes to a close and we gear up for the high holidays in 2 weeks, we have incredible opportunities, especially in this year, to make a difference in ways that truly cannot be measured. A phone call to a friend, or maybe a member of the shul, an email to someone we haven't seen recently, letting them know how much we miss them, a smile to someone at the grocery store or someone that we pass on the street when we go for a walk. These small gestures, it can literally mean the world to someone else. And as the Rambam, as Maimonides writes, as we enter into these days of judgment and of deen, we have to imagine that the scales of our collective fate, that they can literally be tipped by the performance of what may seem like the most inconsequential, the smallest mitzvah, the smallest gesture. And so may we all find the strength to understand the power that we have, the power of our gestures and the impact that we can have through these smallest of actions. And so Orit and Shaya and Nava and Noam, they join me in wishing you and your family a Shabbat Shalom, a peaceful and a restful Shabbat.